Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. This week's episode, we're going to do a little bit of rapid fire and a little bit of discussion. So, let's kick it. First, we will be starting with a discussion that I'm going to read a quote that Brett Contreras said on the Uberman podcast, because it's this 33-second clip that's circulating on Instagram, sure on TikTok if I was there as well, a lot right now. So we've had it sent to us a few times over this week and people are just asking for our thoughts. So we figured it would be best to do it on the podcast as well. So the topic was, how does tempo lifting and lowering weights impact muscle growth? And Brett Contreras said, this is going to be a shock to the listeners. Tempo doesn't affect hypertrophy that much. You can have a 1-second repetition or an 8-second repetition, and it builds muscle similarly. And it blows people's mind because they go, what? You don't have to do the negatives. You can just lift the weights and let it crash down. But as long as you were controlling the weights on the way down, I think tempo matters mostly for longevity. If you're just being very erratic and so explosive and not controlling the weight, you have a better chance of getting injured over time. Thoughts?
So first off, so he's saying that tempo mostly has effect on longevity. Well, you could argue that to truly gain a lot of hypertrophy, you need longevity in the gym.
That's true.
Yeah.
So in a way, achieving longevity through training is a very good side way to get more hypertrophy. But aside from that, I mostly agree with that statement. But what I don't like about that type of clip that's sent to us is I didn't watch the full podcast. I don't know the context of what was said before, what's said after. So I can only talk about the 33-second clip. And the thing is, what he's saying is kind of true, but his extreme example, I would debate that.
The seconds?
Yeah, because, so we all know, and it's been shown for at least 10, 12 years now, that mechanical tension is the main driver of hypertrophy. The main driver. It doesn't mean that there's not other drivers. It doesn't mean that there's not indirect components about the training aspect that can affect hypertrophy indirectly. Okay, but we know that directly mechanical tension is the main trigger. Good. We know that for actual hypertrophy, which is the build of cross-section area of the muscle fibers, concentric action are the main trigger, whereas eccentric actions are more involved in series hypertrophy, which is like an increase in sarcomere length and blah, blah, blah. So it's not as drastic on a visual, but it does have impact on sports performance and stuff like that, joint resiliency, tissue resiliency. So to say that eccentric contractions have no impact on hypertrophy is also misleading. It's just a different type of hypertrophy. But also, one thing that bugs me a lot with a lot of younger coaches when it comes to tempo is that they're under the impression that doing, for example, a 4-0-1-0 tempo, that the 4 seconds spent during the eccentric contraction is eccentric training. It's not eccentric training. You're not, all of the benefits from eccentric contractions you see in the literature are not done at submaximal weight, just doing regular sets with a 4-second count. That's not what these 4-second tempos do. These 4-second tempos are good. We've talked about this before, but it's great to build eccentric control, to build the intermuscular coordination during the eccentric contraction, to have better control of the movement, to learn the movement. It's also very beneficial in the early stages to build true concentric strength. Eventually, as you get more advanced, you need to speed up the speed of the eccentric contraction in order to be able to exert more force potential via the use of the stretch shortening cycle and on and on. It also creates a little less muscle damage because you're spending less time during the eccentric contraction, which allows you to do more total work, which can eventually help to build more strength and on and on and on, and or hypertrophy. But where it gets tricky, though, and this is where I disagree with the example, because I'm convinced that if we were to sit down with Brett Contreras, he would agree with what I was saying. I just think it was being extreme with his example. But there would be a difference between a 1 second rep versus an 8 second rep. And the reason is, if you're doing a 1 second rep, it means that your eccentric is done in half a second. If your eccentric is done in half a second, you're going to build a lot of elastic energy during that eccentric contraction that will translate in a lot of momentum generated during the concentric action. So if your concentric action is triggered or started via momentum, then guess what? You're pulling away from mechanical tension to the muscle during that concentric action, which we know is highly relevant for cross-sectional hypertrophy components. So if I'm using a tempo that's so fast that I'm not maximizing the potential of my concentric action, then how can you say that speed of movement has zero impact? Because the 8 second rep, I don't know if he meant like a 4 second down, 4 second out, I don't know. But an 8 second rep is very, very extreme. This could actually be negative in the sense that now let's say we're doing 8 reps. So we know that on a 1RM continuum, 8 reps is 78% of 1RM. Okay, so let's say your 1RM is 100 kilos, so you're using 78 kilos. Well, if I'm doing a 7-0-1-0 tempo for an 8 second rep, well, the eccentric length or the tempo of each rep is so long that to do 8 reps, there's no way I'm going to be able to use 78 kilos. I might only be able to use 65 or 70 kilos. So then in that sense, I'm negatively affecting my potential of mechanical tension during my concentric action because I'm using less than what I would be able to use normally with normal tempo. But on the flip side, going too fast, you're using kinetic energy and you're bouncing off and you're using momentum, so you're pulling away from mechanical tension. So both, in my opinion, are bad. So the best would be a tempo that is controlled, let's say 3 or 4 second tempo, that's slow enough to negate a lot of that bounce and elastic energy. So you have a truer concentric action that's hard, that leads to increased mechanical tension. But you don't necessarily want it to be so long that then it affects that aspect. So if you look in the literature, generally the 3 to 4 second is what's promoted. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So like I think the full problem is where this is pulling from a 33 second clip. There's so much more nuance around the conversation because like if we just add in range of motion to that conversation, it completely changes it. Because if you're talking about a shrug, is a 1 second eccentric fine? Yes. It's a tiny range of motion. It doesn't that is still a controlled eccentric velocity for that range of motion. If you're talking about a squat, it is no longer a controlled eccentric velocity. So firstly you have to look at it in terms of the specific range of motion that you're training. Then, so if we're looking at just if he just used a blanket statement of a 1 second repetition, okay, cool. I know it was a blanket statement to make a point, not anything against it, but we do know that as we get closer to concentric failure, concentric velocity also slows down. So it's very normal that once you're getting closer to those end reps, especially on like something like machines, when you're talking about hypertrophy, so like say a pendulum squat, that concentric could take 2 seconds very easily. But it's not out of trying to make it a 2 second rep. It's out of that is the maximum concentric speed that you can generate at that point of a set because you're close to failure. And we know training close to failure is also very important for hypertrophy. So then all of a sudden, it's a more nuanced conversation. It's not just, this 1 second versus 8 second gives you the exact same stimulus. Like, okay, I get the point you're trying to make. We don't need to unnecessarily slow down an eccentric tempo to generate as much hypertrophy as possible. Okay, fair enough. But there's more nuance than just, if you do it this way, you'll get as much hypertrophy as you do it this way.
And now, and this is what might get confusing for certain coaches who are familiar with time under tensions and stuff like that. It's that in the past, like the norms were that for each strength quality, you had the associated time under tension range. So for relative strength, it was 1 to 20 seconds. For functional hypertrophy, 20 seconds to 40 seconds. For hypertrophy, 40 seconds to 70 seconds. And this is the part where I think that it's been pretty much confirmed now that this is a little past. It's not as relevant. But that being said, it doesn't mean that the duration of a set doesn't have an impact, though. It might not necessarily have a direct impact on muscle protein synthesis via increased mechanical tension, but a longer set, no matter what, will create more metabolic stress, which indirectly will improve like cellular function, the amount of capillaries, nutrient storage mechanism, which in the end, in the long run, can positively affect the bigger picture of hypertrophy. Yeah. So this is why for us with Kilo in our hypertrophy specialization course, we still use accumulation phases with training methodologies that pushes the boundaries or the limits of series time under tension, because we're trying to affect change on a metabolic perspective to improve the hypertrophy mechanism in the long run. So it's not completely irrelevant. It is irrelevant if you look at science on a purely, we've done a study, blah, blah, blah. We compared this versus this tempo versus this tempo for 8 weeks on leg extension with this group, blah, blah, blah. And it showed that there was no difference. And I get that, okay? But now we're talking about real world, real life, over long periods of time. If you truly want to optimize hypertrophy, you also need to optimize cellular functions. It's part of the bigger picture. So to me, to completely eradicate any time under tension perspective is wrong. But the thing that's important to understand is if you're aiming for a set of 60 seconds, okay, because you really want to create some type of metabolic stress. Now, this is where it becomes a little tricky, because you could do 10 repetitions on a 5010 tempo, which is 60 seconds of TUT, or you could do 20 repetitions on a 2010 tempo, which is also 60 seconds of TUT. But the training response would be different between both protocols. Yeah. Okay, so that shows you up to a certain point that only looking at time under tension is a little limiting. And the reason why there would be a difference is, on one end, you're doing 10 repetitions in 60 seconds. On the other end, you're doing 20 repetitions in 60 seconds. Concentric action tends to build up way more hydrogen ions, which will lead to more lactate than eccentric repetition. So if you're spending a ton of time in the eccentric at submaximal load, you're building eccentric control. You're not building much eccentric strength unless you're completely untrained eccentrically. You're creating some muscle damage because of the dynamics of eccentric contractions, but it's submaximal weight, so it's not extreme muscle damage. But you only have 10 concentric actions, so that sodium calcium pump is not triggered to the same extent as the 20 reps. Now, the difference is the 20 reps, of course, because you have double the amount of concentric action, you won't be able to use as much weight as the 10 reps with a 5010 tempo. Okay, although the 5010 tempo will slightly bring down your normal 10 RM load, it's most likely going to be a greater load than what you can use for 20 reps on a 2010. So then in that sense, the 20 reps on a 2010 as a negative in terms of mechanical tension versus the same 60 seconds of TUT, but with 10 reps with 5010. So it's a very complex, very tricky, very layered aspect.
Yeah.
And I just wish that people understood the purpose of time under tension and stop obsessing about it. It's a tool that you use for certain aspect, but generally speaking, Brad Contreras in his statement is right. You don't need to have a overly slow eccentric contraction to build hypertrophy. You don't necessarily need 40 to 70 seconds of time under tension to build hypertrophy. But hypertrophy is maximized when you have a mixture of different modes of actions. So
old school bodybuilders had it right. They always train controlled. Like they never train quick. They always it's all about controlling the movement, squeezing.
Yeah. No, and you know, like in some what's interesting with the real old school bodybuilders, I mean, even not that old school. Like even like if we go. Just back to the Ronnie Coleman days. Like Ronnie Coleman, like in his early stages, I'm not sure like in the end when he was actually like repeating his Mr. O status. But I know that he would have phases where he would just do strength. Like his training would be very like powerlifting type. It was very strength. And like he would pop those reps and he would use a lot of heavy weights, and then he would transition to more like hypertrophy phases where now the tempo would be more controlled and smooth and the reps would be higher and it would deload a little bit his training. So again, it just shows you that even periodization that's often talked as being useless for hypertrophy back in the days at its place. Like I love the old school bodybuilding. It's to me they you know,
were old school bodybuilders always kind of like broken?
No,
that's what I'm wondering.
It really depends on which ones.
But you have to be careful though, because Ronnie Coleman, as broken as he is, a lot of the issue he has happened because of surgery, like mistakes done during surgery. So it's not 100% just related to
I'm
his
just wondering.
training.
But he was
I
also
just
like
didn't know.
Squatting 800 pounds.
No.
That's when he broke his back.
No. I know. Like Ronnie Coleman was an extreme beast. Not only was he strong, not only was he a beast, but he trained a lot too.
Yeah.
He had a high amount of volume. He had a decent frequency. He trained a lot. He got a few injuries, but like the reason why he can't walk now, it's more because of mistake during surgery than the result of an injury. So it's misleading. But yeah, I mean, like it just depends, man. It's just like
No, but like in the 50s, 60s, 70s bodybuilders, they weren't
50s anabolics
they weren't as big. You know, they didn't get as big and stiff and stuff, and they still did real movements. And
anabolics in bodybuilding did not become a thing until the early 60s. And then we're talking about just anabolics. So they weren't back then. They weren't using insulin, growth hormone. They weren't using that. They weren't using prostaglandins. They weren't using SARMs. They weren't using peptides. They weren't using IGF-1. They weren't using all these things.
I mean, they looked athletic. They looked very different.
Well, they moved more. Man, like you've watched Pumping Iron, right? You see these guys lift. They all have external rotation. They all squat ass to grass. You know, it's
I hope
it's
everyone
very different.
listening to this have watched Pumping Iron.
But it's just like, to me though, I'm like, because yes, I love the science and strength training. I think it's great. But to me, I'm also into this because I like the real lift and the whole that vibe, and so sometimes, yes, maybe like you'll gain more direct quad hypertrophy of like fiber XYZ by doing a leg extension, blah 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 blah. But to me, there's something to be said about building your mass, doing big ass long range of motion movements and grinding, and I don't know, there's something about it. So yeah, I'll agree with you. The old timers knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I think my issue is the framing of the question. Like, why does everything have to be looked at in isolation these days in terms of, oh, for hypertrophy specifically? Yes, like, okay, because like even Brett Contreras alluded to it, like this isn't the only answer because he brought up longevity. So it's like, why does everything have to just be looked at in terms of hypertrophy? Because I know the whole longevity studies are saying the more muscle mass you have, the more likely you are to live longer. But like realistically, people shouldn't just be training for hypertrophy and hypertrophy alone. There's more to life than hypertrophy.
Yeah, but then muscle mass there. You know, like Nick Walker.
Oh, yeah.
Like Nick Walker's BMI is 40. And he's shredded. He's shredded, like single-digit body fat. He has a BMI of 40. So, I mean, I don't care that you have
longevity.
Longevity will not be great.
Healthy,
I mean, so there's a limit to the
I wonder if The Rock is trying to increase his longevity by losing all that weight. He had carrying a lot of muscle.
Yeah, I didn't follow that thing at all, but I mean, why not? It's harder. Like all that mass is harder for.
Yeah, it's more metabolically
Not
demanding.
Everyone should carry as much as they can gain in the weight room. That's why, and you know it.
Well, especially when it's supernatural. Yeah. Like you can carry as much as you can carry, and it'll be healthy if it's done naturally. But
no, but I think it's also over. I think that whole statement is a little overblown, right? Aren't they really just talking about maintaining muscle mass for the purpose of freaking moving?
I think so. Yeah.
Because if you look at the blue zones, like is anyone in the blue zone ridiculously jacked by the time they're like 95?
No.
Yeah. But they're moving. They're using their strength to do daily activities.
Exactly. You know, like the old Asian ladies you see in the park, like doing like
Tai Chi
rotations and stuff. Well, are they massive? No. Are they old? Yeah. Why do they have longevity? Because they move every day and they can use their body to do stuff.
Okay. So now we'll go into some questions because those were 20 minutes of thoughts on that. So that covers that. So first question. When you have goals of gaining muscle and strength.
Like just lift weights. The side effect of any weightlifting is muscle.
So when you have goals of gaining muscle and strength, how do you typically approach deloads? Proactively, reactively, and how often? I have been consistent with a strength and hypertrophy training program 4 times a week for 2 years and haven't hit a plateau, but occasionally recovery takes longer and or fatigue sets in.
It's a hard one because it's so dependent on the client or the trainee, because most trainees, and by most I'm talking well over 90% of trainees, life will dictate their deload or unloading periods. Yeah. For someone who's been on a strict program for 2 years,
4 times a week,
it's most likely that they're going to dictate their life to suit their training. Like that's more that sort of direction for that person. So in their circumstance, I would look at it proactively. So it could just be every 12 weeks. I don't think if you're not hitting progression issues, why not just do a full macro cycle, take your active recovery week and keep going in that fashion. It isn't until there is notable stalls in your progression within the macro cycle that I would even consider.
And you're talking about strength progressions?
Yeah, strength. Because like, you can't really base your progress on hypertrophy because like it's such a hard thing to actually measure, because even like say you're doing your in-body every week, it's so dependent of so many other factors outside of just training. So yeah, I think you have to measure it on strength perspective. But yeah, so until there is notable stalls within your strength progression within the macro cycle, I wouldn't proactively plan unloading weeks within macro cycle. I would wait until there is that stall.
I mean, it's even kind of makes me think of you, because you're uber consistent with your 4 times a week hitting it, and this person might also need to figure out kind of like what you did, and that maybe active recovery week isn't not training. They're still in the gym, but it's different modalities of training that they're doing during that week.
Yeah, because like for me, if I take the full active recovery week, and I obviously if I'm on holidays or vacation, I will, and not try and train then. But if I'm just due an active recovery week because I feel a little beat up, or I know this is a time period before going into an even more intensive macrocycle, okay, it makes sense to take an active recovery week. But if I don't stay in the gym, I always feel like I have too much of a detraining.
You deflate.
I deflate both in muscle and even CNS recruitment. Like I've noticed there's a noticeable difference in that week one that I feel like I'm went back three weeks of regression within that 1 week. So I like to do something. Like I did one last week. Yeah. It was last week, yeah. And it was super simple. It was real low volume on primary compound movements. And it was somewhat of a reintroduction. So submaximal loads, real submaximal in terms of total volume was 3x3. And then the rest of the session was single joints. And I just tried to hit as many different movement patterns of the specific joints that I was training that day as possible. So like upper body, I focused on all the different ways you can move your shoulder. So flexion, extension, horizontal abduction, horizontal abduction, on. And then elbow, wrist, then lower body, same thing, hip, knee, ankle.
Yeah, you were doing some different movements last week.
It was fun though.
Yeah.
But I agree with Porik and everything he said, but I just think that we have to be careful because the question did not talk about recovery week. It talked about deloads.
Yeah, it's a little different.
So deloads, to me, to answer his question, it's a mixture of reactive and proactive. And what I mean by this is, in order to be proactive, you first need to be reactive to know what that person needs. So what it means is, at first you plan with so you always do you do the intake call, the introductory assessment with the client to try to gauge that person. And then based on your assumption, you start with a plan, right? So, okay, client X will start with moderate volume. We'll use undulating periodization. We'll use 4 times a week. We'll use constant loading mesocycle, and we'll just see what happens. So everything's good. Everything's perfect. You keep on going. But then you start noticing that the client starts complaining on week 5 and week 11 of each macro. They're like, man, like I'm really starting to feel like my joints are, I'm like,
tired.
I'm tired. I don't move as well. Then you're like, oh, okay, so maybe now I'll be reactive. Like I'm reactive to what he's saying. So now for the next macro, I'll be proactive and I'll be like, you know what? For you now, we'll use in each intensification phase, we'll use a step load mesocycle structure, which means that the week 6 and week 12 of each macro, we're doing like 40 to 50% less volume in the session. So this way, you have that built-in unloading week that allows him to keep progressing without feeling lethargic. So we were first reactive,
but then you were proactive
to become proactive because eventually you want to get to the point where you always want to get to the point where you're able to deload before
that happens.
The fatigue sets in.
Yeah.
If you get to the point where you can fine tune this.
Yeah. Because that in the way this person ended their question was, but occasionally recover takes longer and or fatigue sets in. So it is paying attention to, well, in what instances did that happen? Yeah. Like, is it something like you're saying it's intensification phases that's happening? Like, what is causing it?
Yeah. Is it super high intensity macros? Is it lower intensity macros with higher volume? So
exactly. You need to try to look if there's a trend.
Yeah.
Like I have a client where it's all fluke. There's no trend. It's just at one point he's just run down. So I'm like, okay, let's chill this week, let's drop the volume.
Yeah.
But it's super random.
I mean, it so depends on the person even too in their
And that's how you would train a woman but based on her cycle. Like the first time you train her, you don't really know, so you just do a normal macro, but then you see how much her cycle affects her training and her recovery, so then you can start planning so that you can adjust to her cycle. And
exactly.
And that takes a while for people to really realize, because it can also be different for girls even. Like there are trends within the cycle, but then I still find that what most people say sometimes isn't exactly how I react.
Oh yeah, so that's why you have to see how that person, that woman particularly reacts to her. Because some women, it doesn't affect them. Some, like you said, some of them. You know.
Because like earlier in my career, like I would do the like Schmidt-Bleicher's deload every third workout, but then I quickly realized, because of course that came from like Olympic level like trainees. So then I quickly realized most people don't need it. Yeah. So I didn't need to have this pre-programmed deload every third workout. But you also have to keep in mind that the way we program with our 3-week mesos, it's almost like every time we change meso, it's a semi-built-in deload because week 1, you need to reacclimate yourself to the new motor pattern involved in the program. Now, the more advanced you are, the less reacclimation you need to do. So the less unloaded that first week becomes. But in the early stages, it's almost like you don't really need deloads earlier on, because every new phase is a deload for at least a week by the time you rebuild it. But then eventually you kind of need to be a little more clever. But it does not necessarily mean that it needs to be a deloading week. It can be like I talked about, I think 2 weeks ago in a podcast, where I have a client where we noticed that what tends to fatigue him is high intensity, and he tends to thrive on volume. So it's 4-week accumulation, 2-week intensification. So there's many ways that you can monitor fatigue.
So we like being reactively proactive. That's the answer. Okay, next question. Regarding your fat loss and hypertrophy specialization courses, with Gen Pop and for athlete clients who have poor conditioning, do you ever find that you have to use novice conditioning strategies even though the client might be an intermediate or advanced lifter?
Okay, this is a great question, because I find that a lot of people don't understand the nuance of this course. And maybe that's a lack of specificity on our end. But when you're doing the hypertrophy specialization and fat loss specialization course, and it says novice, intermediate, advanced, we're not necessarily always talking about a pure novice trainee. Because you know what? A real novice trainee would never do a hypertrophy specialization.
That's on us.
No. But it's just like in my head, it was clear that this is the protocol for the novice in that style of training.
Yeah.
Okay? Like it was not meant to be you're a novice trainee. Yeah. Like why would someone who's never trained would need a hypertrophy specialization with metabolic stress method?
Yeah.
No, that's not even a thing. Like if you've never trained, you just need to start training, learn training, and then you're going to build hypertrophy in the first 6 months anyways. Okay. So it's not even a thing. So that's why in my head, it was clear. Yeah. Okay. But we're talking about novice in that field. So if you're talking about a Gen Pop, and by the way, an athlete, I would never recommend an athlete to do any one of these courses.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, not the course, but
the train. Yeah, good point. The training from these courses, because it's super irrelevant unless your athlete has a ridiculously long off season. But then for the Gen Pop, you need to have a base. If you have no base, don't even approach those specialization. Now, once you have a base and now you want to introduce this, if you've never done it, you need to use the novice, even if the dude's jacked, even if the dude's strong. If the dude, all he's ever done is standard strength training and he's never done any type of metabolic type work in the weight room, you need to use a novice structure.
Minimum effective
And we
dose.
see it when we used to do it live and trainers come and do those courses. They were like dead just from doing,
Yeah. It's almost like we should put a note on the course and call it progression 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Maybe that would have been a smarter approach.
So many things we're realizing now. But so there's a second part to this question. So do you want me to reread the first part or you're good with that one? Because it was, do you ever find that you have to use novice conditioning strategies even though the client might be an intermediate or advanced lifter? So they're just talking about the conditioning strategies specifically.
Oh, sure.
So it'd be the same.
Yeah, same thing.
Okay, but then in your experience, how long does it typically take for them to graduate from novice to intermediate, whether they're Gen Pop or pro athlete? So again, just a reminder, we don't use these with athletes, so we'll pay attention to that.
One macro typically.
Yeah.
Like a one well done 4 times a week.
And then it says, can you give several examples of coaching decisions you've made? But I just think they're talking specifically in when you've seen someone move from novice to intermediate to advanced.
Well, it's once they can master and then, they start to plateau on that, whatever program you're doing, even with the conditioning, once it becomes like easy and they adapt to it, they're not getting the same benefit or whatever, then you move on.
But even the nature of these courses or the content taught with them, it's not like ever you're running back to back macrocycles. These are one-off things that we implement for very specific reasons. So it's not like you say, all right, I'm going to do this for 6 or 12 weeks and I'm going to do this for 12 weeks and just like keep going through the progression. No, you like say they need this intervention, you put it within their program, they do it for a macrocycle, then you go back to regular strength training. And then the next time they need it, you go to the next progression because if they've done the first one right or it hasn't been too long between the two, like if it's 3 years between the two, you could possibly repeat a slightly more complex version of the first one, but you could also go to the second. You'd
have to look at the data from when they actually did the training, and even their recovery from that training. What was it like for them when they did it? What did their reps, what did their work actually look like in the gym when they were doing these specialization phases, to then decide, well, maybe you don't even need to go to the next intermediate one because they were slammed in the first one. Yeah.
So I've done many of those hypertrophy specialization macros in my lifetime.
You're saying personally?
Personally.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you after a 12-week of this, you should feel like complete crap. Okay.
Be shredded or jacked.
No, you should feel like beat up, everything. You should feel like crap, which is why you absolutely cannot, like Porrick was saying, do back-to-back-to-back specialization macros like this. So the idea is you do one of those, okay, and then it goes to that same old fitness fatigue paradigm where now you create a ton of fatigue, but then you move on to strength with drastically less volume. And what's going to happen by the end of the second week of your strength phase, now you're going to start feeling really good all of a sudden. And then, oftentimes, at least with me, what would happen is, boom, I would put on like 5-6 pounds, like almost within a week. It's like that, all that super compensation, like we reduce the volume so now we can express the strength and hypertrophy gain or whatever it might be. But like it's normal to feel crappy, so you need to make sure you don't do any back-to-back. But it's not, but it's super tricky. It's because, for example, if you decide that you're ready to do a hypertrophy specialization, because your Gen Pop client decides he wants to enter a physique competition. But that client is not necessarily like really, really, really strong. Okay. Well, you know what? With that client, my first phase, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I would probably do a giant set, which is the most extreme. But why would I do this? It's because that client has no experience with that type of training. That client is not very, very strong. So that client can actually go through a giant set and not be as annihilated as if it was someone with a 500-pound squat. But what's good is now you build the metabolic mechanism and the cellular function and capillaries and all that kind of stuff very, very, very early on. You optimize it early on so that you can leverage better hypertrophy afterwards. But at the same time, if we have a really, really strong dude that says, now I want to do a hypertrophy specialization, but he has zero experience training north of 8 reps, well, I'm not going to start with a giant set. Yeah. I might just start with something as simple as pre-exhaustion.
Yep.
Okay, so with these courses, we give you structures and tools and progression, but at the end of the day, never forget you're a coach. You need to program based on who's in front of you and what's going to be better for that person. But if you understand the concept that in hypertrophy specialization, we alternate between metabolic, mechanical tension, metabolic, mechanical tension, metabolic, and on, and we tend to go downwards in metabolic stress and upwards in mechanical tension stress. If you understand that concept, then you can make a better decision as to, well, you know what, I'll use the novice with this person, or I'll use the advanced with this person, or progression 1 or progression 3 or whatever. But the thing that works for sure, though, if in doubt, start progression 1, to progression 2, to progression 3. That's why they were built that way. They were built that way to ease decision making and decision fatigue sometimes that we can get as coaches. But it doesn't mean that you need to follow these like to a T.
And just to reinforce these two specialization, the fat loss and hypertrophy, we do not recommend using them with athletes like playing sports. I know we call ourselves athletes sometimes. Trainees want to do that, but we're talking about like if you have clients that are actively athletes, you do not want to do this with them. And then also it's extremely important, because I know this is something we're constantly trying to get across to people, is you can, like with the fat loss specialization, you are absolutely never in a deficit when you're doing these training because of how hard these training are. So just remember when to use what. Okay, now we're going to go back to a discussion. So I have a topic, and then we're going to discuss. The topic is mesocycle goals versus macrocycle goals versus year goals.
I can start. So it's a funny topic. I can't remember. It came about, someone asked a question and it just seemed like they couldn't differentiate between all these goals, because mesocycle goals, we're really referring to the strength quality that's being trained within that mesocycle, and it doesn't go any further than that in terms of the overarching goal of the long-term training, but it's going to dictate the training response from that mesocycle. The macrocycle goal is going to be the overarching goal that we're aiming for, with the combination of the mesocycles to make up that macrocycle. And the macrocycle goal is going to be the average of all those mesocycles. Then the year goal is the long-term goal, and it's going to be the average of all the macrocycles that make up the year. So it's like you can't really talk about one without knowing what the other ones are. But so since the mesocycle goals are the smallest ones and they relate directly to the strength qualities that we can train, like it's pretty simple of what it can be. It can be hypertrophy, it can be functional hypertrophy, it can be relative strength, power. So like it's that is somewhat your go-to mesocycle goals that you can program. Obviously, you can look at things like strength endurance, but on a strength training perspective, we don't really consider that within our long-term periodization for overall strength development. Then macrocycle goals, it's more physical goals that are the outcome of a macrocycle. So again, hypertrophy is one, because hypertrophy is also a goal. It's the increase in muscle mass and cross-sectional area. Then it's not functional hypertrophy. It's no longer a goal, because that is a strength quality. It's absolute strength. So the addition of hypertrophy and strength. So strength irregardless of body weight. Then with relative strength. So strength in regards to your body weight, and then with power again. So the confusion definitely comes from that there is overlapping goals between the mesocycles and the macrocycles, but you just have to look at it in terms of what you're talking about. You're talking about an overall goal for the macrocycle that is the average of the totality of the programming that you're doing, whereas the mesocycle goal is the exact thing you're training in that moment.
Yeah, and then the year, then it's a little bit more nuanced, because then the year it becomes what is, if you look at the 4 macros done throughout the year with these 4 macros, what is the overarching focus or quality that will come out of that year of training? So it could be a hypertrophy focus, it could be a absolute strength focus, power focus, relative strength focus, or even balance. So some people, they're like, you know what, I don't want to bias anything. I just want, at the end of the year, I want to have an equal distribution of stressors across hypertrophy, absolute strength, relative strength, power. Cool, that's fine. So that could be a year goal. But again, that completely differs from a mesocycle goal or a macrocycle goal.
I think this would get confusing for people as well, beyond just, well, people get confused sometimes just between the mesocycle and macrocycle differentiation. But even beyond that, because if you're not in our type of programming and periodization, people view goals very broadly. So they're going to look at it more as like, well, my goal is fat loss. My goal is just hypertrophy. My goal just is strength. So I think sometimes just even taking a step outside, where people, if they're new to this, that's where they get confused, because it's the strength qualities that are dictating goals.
But people need to understand that. So even if someone's goal was strength, I just want to be strong. Well, you cannot do 5x5 for 1 year straight. Like at one point, you're going to plateau. You need to change something to keep progressing. And at one point, you might having a plateau because, well, now, I'm pretty strong, but now I need more size in order to generate more force potential. So now I need to train hypertrophy, but I'm not training hypertrophy because my goal is hypertrophy. I'm training hypertrophy to leverage my goal of strength.
Yeah, like the sequencing of the qualities that you train is super important, because we want to, just like Steph said, leverage the previously trained quality to amplify the results that you're trying to get. So for any sort of strength goals, having a bigger hypertrophy base is going to be massively beneficial. For any sort of power goals, having a big strength base is going to have a massive impact on your end goal. So and then even for hypertrophy, so if your overarching goal is hypertrophy, we still want to tap into those higher intensity relative strength phases, so we're getting more and more efficient at recruiting those motor units. So when we go back to hypertrophy, we can do it with greater loads and higher efficiency and create more hypertrophy within those phases. So you have to leverage other qualities to try and make the most of your end goal. So your end goal, you might end up training that quality the most over the course of the year. That's fine. Like a hypertrophy focused year has 2 hypertrophy focused macrocycles, but it doesn't mean there's no, like, we're not using the absolute strength and the relative strength macrocycle as a deloading or unloading phase to allow for recovery. We're using them to leverage the qualities built in this to set up the next macrocycle to really amplify the results.
Yeah, I think it was Timothy Sachemel, who did a study on this. He had a protocol where it was 12 weeks, but he had like a group that just did power training for 12 weeks straight. All the sessions were power. And he had a group that did phase potentiating. So from, hypertrophy to strength to power. So, and guess what? The phase potentiation group, although they did power just 1/3 of the 12 week, they exerted much greater gains in power by the end of that 12 week than the group just doing the power. So again, I think that's a great example of the benefit of training other quality to leverage one goal.
Yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts you want to say on that before I hit the bell?
No, that's good.
Okay. I know there's a lot going on over here at Kilo, and we have not spoken on a podcast yet because we were recording before things have come out. We're not going to go into everything on this one, but I do want to discuss our current 12-week macrocycles because we do have a few more weeks of those being available on trainkilo.com. So a little bit on our side because I know it can seem like, oh my God, what's going on? They're taking away all these programs. But we started with these programs back in 2017. And it was like a simple one-page sheet. You had the training matrix on the top, and then you had the training programs. And that was what it was. And we had 4 of them. And people liked getting these programs. This was before it's so crazy to really think how much has changed in those 8 years. Like back then, there wasn't training programs available everywhere from millions of people constantly.
And the training apps weren't such a big thing.
They were there, but they weren't as popular.
Yeah.
They definitely
Most
weren't
coaches
as
were still using Excel back then.
Yeah. So it was, we started with those programs, and then we just kept adding more programs. And it was never when we started, we didn't think we'd be where we are now, where we have so many programs. And then for a while, like right now, so there's 72 programs. Then we sold the individual
72 macros.
Yeah, macros. Because then again, we did used to sell the individual mesocycle. So it just we had so much. So then I even streamlined it.
It's funny too, because
we
were always perplexed when someone would buy like mesocycle 3 of we're like, why is he buying the phase 3 of that macro?
But we made it so that they could. Of course,
they saw the rep scheme and they just wanted to do that.
Looking back, I would do so much differently in terms of the planning on those. And then even we keep talking about it, people think all of these programs are built continuously all together, which is also not really what we do. And then it's also, people are thinking that these programs are something where you can learn what we teach in our courses, which is really, really not true. So that's why we're taking them away. And it's not like we won't be still having the ability to get training with us, because what people don't realize is we have these 12-week macro cycles on the site, but then we have our Train Heroic programs. We still have we have all of these things that didn't exist when we first started to come. And I was just on a call yesterday with a client, and as we're making all of these changes, it's just funny because I'm telling you guys this is what's happening constantly. And the guy was like, I got on your site, and it's he found us because he's listening to the podcast. He's all motivated. He's all into it. He goes on the site and he's like, I was just overwhelmed because there's too much to choose from. There is. Yeah. So that's why we're doing a streamline. So we're starting with the 12-week macro cycles. So right now it's the biggest discount we've ever done on macro cycles because we know a lot of you have. Some of you, are pretty close to having all of them. So we're giving you the opportunity to complete your collection. So it's basically, it starts at 40% off and works all the way up to 70% off if you're buying 20 or more programs. And then there are free programs once you hit certain tiers of the volume discounts. So I definitely recommend to grab any of those programs while they're currently on sale, because they will no longer be on sale. We will be coming out with more programs, but as we've continued to grow, we're hitting different people now. Our customer base used to be a very small circle of a specific type of client, and now we're also getting people who are just looking at training programs, which is wonderful for us because as Kilo, we just want more people to get better programs and periodized programs. So we're coming out with programs, but they're going to be easier to understand what you're getting. Because for a random person to just look and they're like, I'm buying a 12-week functional hypertrophy macrocycle, and all they see are the rep schemes or the training methods designed to each. It just doesn't mean much to them. So we're just optimizing as we continue to grow with Kilo. We're not going anywhere. We'll still be here, but we just have changes coming. I know another big one is because we made the announcement that we will no longer have our physical location as of July 2026. So we released our final live courses here at Kilo. Again, as a reminder, we're not saying
we won't be here.
We won't be around.
Kelsey is being emotional.
You are.
Not right now.
Right now.
Someone else want to say anything?
Yeah, that we're just, I mean, to go with, along with the times, we're putting more and more of our courses, well, all our courses are going to be online, and then it's going to give us the freedom to move around more, like go to people's actual gyms that want like specific courses, private courses. There's just more possibilities without having to have like a brick and mortar. We're just kind of adapting, you know, with the way things are going.
I mean, it's just like it's a reality in our industry. People are not participating as much in live education, so it's a harder thing to sustain with a brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know I have to say something. I just need a second. I know, because I keep getting messages from people. You're freaking out.
yeah.
But it's not. I can't. I'm just gonna cut this. I can't say anything else. I'm gonna edit that out. Some of it.
So what makes you the saddest about not having the brick and mortar?
Yeah, because that's going to help.
I mean, she's cutting it out anyway. It might be a good piece. Because we're saying, right? Because we're saying that we're still going to be here. We're still going to see our people. We're still going to do courses. We're still going to be around, do online training, do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going anywhere. Kelsey, we're not going anywhere.
But it's not that. It's the space itself.
I mean, it's tough, right? Like, because we were talking about this weekend, and because I got emotional because I was 14 years old, and my goal and dream in life was to have my own gym. Mm-hmm. And we worked in nice gyms. Sanctuary was a nice commercial gym. CHP in St. Louis was a really nice gym. Pollock and Group was a nice gym. Then we have our own gym that, like, you know,
really kick ass.
We put a ton of time in choosing the equipment, creating all of the primate programs for our group classes first, and then buying the equipment to make sure that every program you were able to do it in the gym. And then we lived through the burglary in California, and then the ridiculous, crazy moves during COVID, and the truck missing, and the this and the that, and then no flooring available in Florida, and the flooring gets put down the day before the equipment arrives. And I was trying to fit the exact same amount of equipment in 2,000 less square foot of gym space, and it took me forever to figure it out. We're figuring it out, and then and then we're training in the gym with, like, and you know how much we messed around with the color of the wall, how much, like, I hated the whole gray, and then we repainted it black. So it's when you take a step back and think about all of the effort, energy, time, passion we've put behind the gym, that now, like in August 2026, where this won't be, like it's hard, you know. So sure. That's I understand why she's emotional about it, but it's a decision we made because business-wise, it made absolutely zero sense to renew a lease for 5 years on a brick and mortar that people are not coming to for courses anymore. So it's like, let's readjust our business model to fit the demands of today's world. People want online, will be online. And if somehow there are some demands for live course, which has dropped considerably, but if there's still demands, we'll do live courses. But if we do, we'll just do like we do in Europe, or go to a student's gym that wants to host us, yeah. And that's it. Because now it just makes zero sense.
Yeah. But that's what's funny, because it's like, yeah, we could keep it if we want to, but what you really realize is we're in a position, we're extremely fortunate because we've built our business where it doesn't rely on this. Mm-hmm. And it's the realization of not having this does allow us more freedom. Mm-hmm. And everything we do, we can do without it. So it's not like we can still do the podcast, mm-hmm. we can still train. And then even I had someone reach out to me this morning and just be like, well, where are you going to lift? Where are you going to film exercise demos? And it's like, well, I'm going to lift at a gym. And I know, like, yes, we know it's going to be hard to find a gym. I mean, I already started looking around. I've found one that I'm somewhat actually excited about. And I said to Steph this morning, I was like, maybe we can say we'll give them a rack and they'll give us a membership, because they only have like the rig. No, they have squat racks, but they're just not our squat racks. Yeah. I'm like, I'll give you a rack, I'll give you a barbell and a set of plates. But even what's good for you guys with this change is it's forcing us. I know Porrick just this week just alone added 60 exercises for abs that we're going to film for the exercise database. So we haven't gotten to the fact of updating the exercise database. So we will when we still have our space. So there's probably going to be, that's just 60 of freaking abs. Mm-hmm. So like, who knows what it's going to get up to once we film everything else. But it is powerful because we've built a company that we don't need the physical location. Yeah. Would we like it? Yeah, there are things we'd like, but then there's also the freedom of doing other things.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, because so we realize that our day-to-day, the four of us, we're on our computer most of the time. Yeah. The only time we go in the gym is to train ourselves. Yeah. Most of the time, it's all computer work that we have to do at this point. And then people say, but why don't you just open a gym? Well, we've done it. It's a lot of work. We don't want to. And if we were to do this, it would pull us away from what we're doing with Kilo Education. And we love what we're doing with Kilo Education. So I don't want to have to spend my time rebuilding a gym in a place that we don't know anybody. Like, we would need to start from scratch.
But people need to remember, a house is a house. It's empty. It's like a home. A home is where the heart is. And our Kilo home and family is wherever we go.
And what they don't realize is how much more all in this allows us to go with the online content, and how much more value we can actually put there, and how much they'll probably be seeing more of us because of it. Because right now, if someone gets here twice a year, that's a
stretch.
That's a stretch. That's impressive if people are making here twice a year. Whereas now we're creating platforms that they're going to be seeing a shit ton of us. Like, the podcast was a really good start. They're getting us once a week. Mm-hmm. But now with the continuum, with the other ideas we have to improve the quality of the online courses, like, there's going to be so much more opportunity to see and learn from us than what was possible when it was mostly dedicated time towards live courses, because live courses takes a shit ton of time for development and application of it, whereas now, if we're not as concentrated in that, we have so much more time available to push the content on other platforms.
And then it also clears, like, I mean, a lot of you guys are business owners, so like, it clears some finances for us to invest and providing even greater services for you guys. So that's why we made that decision, because because we can only go by 5-year chunk with this property. So it was like, man, do we want to commit
to 5 years?
5 more years for something that the attendance keeps decreasing every year, and where
Or we can still do exactly what we do without it. That was the biggest thing. It was, for me, realizing that, I was like, shit.
Yeah, we
don't need it, but I want it. But we can still do it. And then, like, I keep saying, it's like, yeah, obviously it's sad, but it's also really exciting.
I mean, it's exciting. It's really exciting to see what we can do now. The possibilities are endless.
And I know I said to that person, too, because what we're so fortunate with is I know that I can reach out to our community if we ever need a gym to film something. Yeah. Like, it's just those things where we have a community now.
Yeah.
Where if we need a gym because we want to do something, there's plenty. And then how cool, because it is like kilo coaches at that gym that we can do stuff with.
Yep.
Can't wait. Like, there's this gym near our place called like Planet Fitness. I think that's where I'm going to go train. It looks cool.
I'm telling you, I want to do, that's where all going to be our chronicles of getting back to going to a commercial gym.
Yeah.
I have high hopes for the one I found, but we'll see. That took a turn for the worse. We'll see you next week.